on the valves and onto the vessels. So really it is a continuous system that allows a smooth flow of blood. So the right coronary artery is sitting on the surface of the heart, on the epicardium itself. So this will be, and this will be the left coronary artery. The right coronary artery will bifurcate into a marginal artery. So this is the marginal of the right coronary. And then it will descend to the posterior aspect of the heart, which will give off an artery that we'll call the posterior descending artery. The left coronary artery itself will will bifurcate into the circumflex artery and a long artery which sits on the anterior aspect of the heart, that we call the left descending artery, or we can also call it the interventricular artery, or we can also call it the anterior descending artery. Anterior descending artery. So it has quite a few names. And then it also gives us the circumflex, which again will supply blood going posteriorly, and it will anastomize with the right coronary at the posterior surface of the heart. Normally, it also gives off other branches such as the obtuse, or marginal, but as well not to be confused with the right marginal. So this is our posterior descending, which is at the posterior. But the important, this is the aorta. The important aspect really the important take-home message about the coronary arteries really is where they actually supply blood. That's the main importance of circumflex. That's the main important point about them. So if we were to start on the right, really, the right coronary artery mainly supplies the right side of the heart, but importantly, it supplies the SA node and the AV node. And obviously the SA node and the AV node are what generate the impulse which causes the cardiac muscles to contract, or which actually causes the heart to pump. So the importance of the right coronary artery is obviously that it really supplies blood to both the SA and AV node. So we have the right coronary there, supplying the SA node and AV node. The right coronary also supplies the right atrium, which is always where we find the SA node. It supplies the anterior aspect of the posterior aspect of the interventricular septum. This is the posterior surface, posterior aspect. And it also, interestingly, supplies the base of the left ventricle. So these are the main areas that are supplied by the right coronary artery, and it also supplies the right ventricle. The left coronary artery mainly supplies the left atrium, left ventricle, the anterior aspect of the interventricular septum. Interventricular septum. However, the base of the left ventricle is supplied by the right coronary artery. So if we were to look on the surface of the heart as it's sitting, I'm not drawing it in an anatomically correct, just for illustration purposes really. So as we look at the heart, this being the apex, we will have the coronary arteries descending from there. So we'll have our right coronary artery giving off the marginal artery there. And obviously this is the right ventricle. All of this is the right ventricle. This being the right ventricle. And that being the left ventricle. So the right coronary will descend, giving off the marginal branch, supply all of the right ventricle and the base of the left ventricle as well. And as it gives off the posterior descending will go on to supply the right atrium, which is obviously found posterior to the ventricle itself. So the atrium is just sitting at the back there without really turning the heart round. Whereas the left coronary artery will descend from there, give off the circumflex, which extends posteriorly, and then give off the main branch, which we see at the anterior surface of the heart, which is called the left descending artery. Ascending branch. Descending, why do I call it ascending? So it will give off the left ascending, give off the circumference, give off the obtuse there. And again, as these branches extend posteriorly, they will supply the atrium, which lies posterior to the ventricles of the heart, and also supply the septums, which separate the ventricles, the interventricular septums. But the important points to remember really is that the right atrium supplies the SA node, the AV and the AV node, and the anterior aspect of the interventricular septum, and it will obviously supply its own ventricles, which are on its side, which are the right and left, which are the right atrium and right ventricles, and also the base of the left ventricle, while the left coronary will supply the left ventricle and the left atrium, which is posterior to the ventricle, and the anterior interventricular septum, which is supplied by the left or the anterior descending artery. So the importance of coronary arteries is usually that they let us know where the problem with the heart is, so that we can then be able to identify pathology and hopefully do something about it. For example, say if someone had atherosclerosis affecting, say if someone had conduction problems and they had severe bradycardia, we will know that if this was something to do with atherosclerosis, we will be able to tell that we have to look into the right coronary artery. Whereas, say if someone had, I'm obviously trying to choose really simple examples, issues with conduction at the, say, at the left bungle branch, we'll know that the artery that supplies the anterior surface where the bungle branches enter the myocardium are the branches from the left descending artery. So we'll know that we're actually dealing with a pathology in the left coronary artery. Obviously, again, I want to say the disclaimer that these videos are for my own learning needs, to identify my own learning gaps, and obviously to highlight to the medical school that I am indeed learning as I go. I haven't de-skilled or forgotten any of my medical knowledge. They are not in any way intended to demonstrate that one has suddenly become a cardiologist. They are really just to demonstrate knowledge that is expected of a second-year medical student. And that is it. So the next section that I'm going to look at will be the veins. And since I am doing the arteries, I just want to do the veins now and make sure that that is done, so that when I next do atherosclerosis, I would have covered all the vessels. So the veins will normally drain into the vena cava, which is made up of the SVC, the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava, which merge together and drain into the right atrium. So if we were to go back to the body, we'll have the main branch draining into the superior vena cava will be the brachiocephalic. Brachiocephalic veins, which are, if I was just going to look, say, at the left hand side, which will be made up of the jugular trunk and subclavian. Again, all that blood which was sent off from the aorta into all the body systems through the subclavian, going, for example, into the upper limb, will all be drained back into the veins in the upper limb, up to the axillary vein, become the subclavian, and then that subclavian will join in with the jugular, and they'll both drain into the brachiocephalic. And as they drain into the cephalic, they form an angle, which is called the venous angle. I really should draw this. I really need to get some proper pens. They form the venous angle. And the importance of the venous angle really is that it's where the thoracic duct enters the venous circulation, and the thoracic duct is it's more like a lymphatic system which collects all the fats, lipids that we consume in our diet, and it collects them from the GI system, from the small intestine. So all the, say when we eat food, that food becomes digested. As it enters the small intestine, it mixes with the pancreatic juices and enzymes and bile salts, which are all secreted into the small intestine. And the lipids themselves are obviously hydrophobic, so they cannot be transported, or they cannot really enter the body system, because they are repelled by cells which are normally will repel anything that is not hydrophilic. So because they are hydrophobic, number one, and because they are quite large, they have to enter the body system via another pathway, and normally they will use the lymphatic system. So they will enter the lymphatic system, where they will be converted into lipoproteins, and then enter the lymphatic system, and then enter the thoracic duct. And eventually find their way into the circulatory system. We obviously do need lipoproteins, because we use them for a number of things, really, including making cholesterol, and then we use cholesterol to make enzymes such as testosterone, aldosterone. We also need them to make bile salts and other things, really. So we do need these lipoproteins. We do need them to be absorbed into the system. However, they can't enter from the GI tract directly into the portal vein. They have to be transported via the thoracic duct. And the importance of that venous angle is that it is where the thoracic duct actually enters into the venous system. So from that venous angle, we will then have a brachiocephalic vein, which then drains into the superior vena cava and into the right atrium. Other veins that drain into the brachiocephalic will include, that will drain directly into the brachiocephalic, will include the hemiazygos. And the hemiazygos is the opposite number of the azygos vein, and the azygos vein drains directly into the SVC. So we have the azygos vein. So the hemiazygos and the azygos vein drain the internal walls of the thoracic cavity. So the anterior and posterior internal walls of the thoracic cavity. We will also have the normal internal thoracic veins, which again accompany the internal thoracic artery. So we will have those joining into the brachiocephalic. So the brachiocephalic really drains from upper limb via the axillary and subclavian veins, and then it also drains from the jugular veins, again from the neck going up to the head and neck, and then collects all of that blood, drained, and it also collects from the hemiazygos and the internal thoracic, collects all of that blood and drains it directly into the SVC. However, the azygos vein will itself drain directly into the SVC. So now we have collected blood that we gave off to the upper limb and the head and neck and the internal thoracic cavity. We haven't collected blood that we gave to the cardiac muscle itself, and this is blood that was given off by the coronary arteries, and it returns back to the right atrium via its own sinus, which is called the coronary sinus. So it's just really near the entry of where the SVC and the IVC enter the right atrium. So we'll have a coronary sinus there. Bringing blood from the heart itself. So the coronary sinus will collect from the great cardiac vein, the small and middle cardiac veins as well, and all of those will drain into the coronary sinuses. Well, the coronary sinus, there is only one, and then blood will return back to the right atrium, and again from the right atrium blood will then move through the tricuspid valve to enter the right ventricle, and then into the pulmonary arteries to enter the lungs, where it becomes oxygenated and then enters the pulmonary veins and back to the left heart. So in this video I have covered the arteries and veins, basically the vessels from the heart up to the thoracic aorta. I've mainly focused on the branches that arise from the aortic arc, and I've shown how they all arise and the bifurcations that they give. And these branches include the coronary sinuses, the coronary arteries that provide oxygenated blood to the cardiac muscle itself. And I've also shown the return of the venous blood into the venous circulation, and how all the blood is collected from, well, how all the blood drains from the coronary sinuses, from the upper limb, from the head and neck areas into the brachiocephalic veins or the SVC, back into the right atrium. And I've also briefly discussed the thoracic duct and what its purpose is and where it actually enters the systemic circulation. And in the next section I will look at atherosclerosis. Since I've started discussing vessels, I'll look at atherosclerosis, how it forms, and the treatments for lipid disorders, including hypertension. And then from that I will then conclude the cardiac cycle, because then I'll need to talk about pressures.